All right, this is BreakFree's recap of the DevOps Leadership Bootcamp that we did in September of 2022. We wanted to create a short summarization video that allows folks who didn't participate to gain the majority of the same knowledge that the folks who heard me talk in the Leadership Bootcamp would have pertained. So what we're going to do is we're going to summarize quickly each thing we covered, and then we're going to directly link to viable articles on our website where we've provided the details that we covered off on in the whiteboarding session. You can always reach out to us and request that we do a one-on-one session. We're happy to do this boot camp at any point in time. All right, so with that, let's get into it. First thing, we really covered off on this idea of pre-digital and post-digital. With the pre-digital space, we talked a lot about how, what IT has been for so long, and in a great way, an IT cost center that is fantastic at managing assets, technology assets that we needed to run critical business functions. And they prioritized processes and ways of working and underlying infrastructure that was built for predictability, availability, and control, so that ultimately we could be a very effective cost center, right? And that what we gravitated to over many, many years is ITIL ITSM is the primary framework for processes and technology management, PMO, and generally a waterfall PMO approach to doing things to ensure we have control and projects are done on time, on budget, etc. And we got really good at building very consistent data center infrastructure to be able to house these assets. And what we talked about is that there is a line in the sand of time, if you will, for these IT organizations where they cross into what we call the post-digital world. And the post-digital world is not a replacement of the pre-digital world. The way we see it is an expansion of IT's capabilities. We want to see IT be digitally capable. And that's the transition that we really focus with organizations on. And what we talked a good deal about, and what a lot of people said, that was kind of an aha moment for me, is so much of what we've been told is that, we're going to transform IT. We're going to replace everything with this new way of operating. And we don't see a lot of very successful companies view it that way. And the way we've really seen it work out and helped, make these kind of things happen is to see that the transformation is not a shift, but an expansion of what we're doing. So we will always need an asset-focused cost center. Now, there is some transformation going on there that we talked a little bit around, the SaaS space, which is a topic for a different day. That is for sure impacting this space some, but it's not replacing the idea that we have a IT function, if you will, that is asset and cost center focused. In the post-digital, what we're doing is we're expanding our IT operating model to be digitally capable. And to do that, we have to understand the underlying drivers of that are things like adaptability, autonomy, speed as the primary drivers of what we're doing over predictability, availability, control, things like that. Not to say those things aren't important in post-digital and to a profit center, but out of the gate, what we care about more than anything are things like speed and autonomy. And so we need processes, management frameworks, and infrastructure and platforms that enable us to build digitally capable digital things, if you will, with these kind of focus areas in mind. And so we talk a lot about the fact that in this new world, we are shifting our IT operating model to include DevOps, to include product and Agile, to include cloud, having these capabilities in addition to what we're doing over here. We've got an article on our website that you can follow that talks a little bit about these kind of two worlds. We also cover off some of the resistance factors, right? One of the big ones we always push on is that there are a lot of players out there who post-digital represents a bunch of revenue that they can't capitalize on with their existing solutions, and they don't want to make investments in things like new consulting frameworks, new technologies, and so they just rebrand what they're doing as post-digital, saying things like our tool is a DevOps tool, or if you just dust off the old consulting playbook, we'll operationalize DevOps for you. And that's a huge resistance factor. There's a bunch of bad information out there about how to do it. We also covered off on there's a lot of resistance internally and externally just because of the amount of change that's happening. And then we also cover off on, and where we get into the digital triad in a second, the idea that we have really 3 big changes happening, which, if not managed right, can cause a whole bunch of conflict and resistance. We then jump into talking about the fact that we really see a number of key anti-patterns to operationalizing not just DevOps, but that these anti-patterns can be applied universally to operationalizing all of the required elements of a digitally capable IT organization, something we call the Digital Triad, which I'll cover in a second. So we covered off on things like, IT just hoping they can hire their way to this, or assigning ownership of things like DevOps. This team is the DevOps team. There's a number of different kind of anti-patterns, and we've got an article that actually covers off on what we think leadership and what good initiatives are doing instead, and they provide a direct contrast to the anti-pattern. So we would recommend you go read that. In our Digital Triad, we spent a good deal of time talking about this, and what we really focused on is the without analysis, which we've got an article we'll link to on that as well, where one of the big things that BreakFree is always consulting on and helping answer these days is, hey, I know I have to do product, Agile, cloud, and DevOps. These are the 3 things that I have to operationalize to be digitally capable. But they're all big ticket transformation items, and they all have, as we like to draw out, many dollar signs associated with them. They're all expensive, complex, and hard to operationalize. Can I just bite off one? And with what we covered off on is a without analysis that talks about, well, if you do this without, if you do cloud without DevOps, or if you do Agile without DevOps, etc., here are the impacts to one another. And what you find is that you have to really do all 3. It's all or nothing, because if you go down this route and don't operationalize one without the other, it can at times almost completely destroy the benefit of the overall digital thing you're trying to do, as well as really limit the impacts that you're supposed to be feeling when you operationalize one of these. So I would recommend, if you're interested in that, really reading about this Digital Triad. Again, if you read all these articles, you'll totally understand that. And I think the important thing to understand for leaders is that they can articulate to their partners ultimately why we have to do all 3, right? And that leadership's job is to help navigate that and kind of help that change happen. And it's a huge challenge. We then got into the recommended approach. So we talked about anti-patterns and what not to do. We talked about the Digital Triad, how you got to do all 3. But there's always the question of, okay, I agree, but how do we do all 3? And what we focused on is a roadmap at a leadership level to help you shift phase from phase and lead your folks through the transformation. Phase 1, leadership declaration starts, and that's all about addressing a lot of the anti-patterns up front, what we are going to do, what we're not going to do. We get into then phase 2 being digital outcomes, and this is a big one that ultimately we do not feel you should start this kind of initiative unless you have identified with your business partners, or at least as an IT organization, but usually with your business partners, you got to build that bridge with business to actually generate profit. Digital outcomes that have the kind of magnitude and impact that they're going to support the kind of funding that's required to operationalize digitally capable. So you don't move forward until you found these digital outcomes. Even if everyone's screaming for DevOps and Agile, you say not until we have used a minimally viable amount of product management capabilities to identify digital outcomes that the business feels confident are going to generate the profit and ultimately justify the kind of spend that's going to be required to make this transformation. But once you do that, how you actually operationalize this is with an enablement-focused approach. Enablement means, as IT, we're putting in place the necessary resources to actually realize the digital outcomes. And then we're supporting those resources transition into this new world because the folks we're going to probably be using don't have this capability. We're going to support them, and we're going to support the build out of the needed and maturation of the needed processes, technologies, cloud environments, etc., with an enablement focus, which means that the resources that we put in place, usually teams, whether it's a cloud enablement team or it's a DevOps enablement team or an Agile enablement team, Agile Office, however you articulate it, their job is not to own any of this stuff, but instead to get others to effectively operate and use this stuff and eventually work themselves either out of a job or into another job, which I'll talk about in a second. So in terms of how we support the transition, we don't give ownership of any of these things. We give ownership of outcomes that are related to other groups effectively using these capabilities, DevOps, Cloud, and Agile. We then get into community to drive some initial scaling and some bottom-up change, where we're going to have folks who, when they see the light, if you will, in this new realm about that there is a new way to work, that it does enable profit, that it does do this, we're going to have some passionate folks in our ranks who want to get more and more people on board with this and educate more and more people on how to do this that aren't directly related to the enablement funded efforts. And to make enablement something that we just do as an organization through skills development and lots of other things, we foster a community, right? And we do whatever we can as leaders to foster a community of folks who are passionate about this stuff and support them. Then we transition into the platform phase, which is all about saying like, okay, when I talked about working yourselves into another job, what happens is once you've enabled enough, and once you have a broad community of folks who understand this and you have workable examples, there is a real opportunity to add an engineering level or a kind of consultative level that lives for the long term in Agile, Cloud, and DevOps. Most commonly we'd think about platform as Cloud and DevOps related, right? I build a digital platform, let's say, where we can build cool digital applications that has things like, the technology we've heard about in Cloud and DevOps, like pipelines and containers and automated testing. And we build this coherent platform and we maintain that to make it easier and easier for our enabled teams to build cool digital stuff. We didn't cover, that's about as deep as we went on platform. We've got actually a number of articles we'll link to on platform in the notes of this video. And we have a link we'll share too just on this roadmap. The last piece we covered off on is scaling. So once we've actually built the technology platforms, we've got to start scaling digital, DevOps, etc. And we actually don't usually focus too much on scaling the platform areas. What we tend to start now focusing on is just engineering capacity to build all this awesome stuff. We talked a lot of, when we talk about the anti-patterns, we reference a lot that you can't hire your way to this and that you need a way to ultimately scale your people. And that we talk a lot about how scaling is focused on the people side of things. How do I get more and more folks to be able to do this? One of the things we highlight, and I don't want to get into it too much, but we'll link to an article on this, is that because of this SaaS transformation, there is some reduction in workforce that's being required in the asset-focused data center space because we're having less and less systems, as well as a whole bunch of stuff that was pioneered in Cloud and DevOps is starting to be applied to the data center space. And that's enabling more automation and more smaller footprints in the data center and things like that. And so our headcounts required to operate these things are going down, and a cost center sees that as a positive. And what we want to do is we want to facilitate in our scaling focus the transition from folks who are basically now without a role in the asset cost center side to transitioning to the profit center side. And so that's what scaling a lot of times is about. All right, but we'll link to an article that covers off on a number of different, this roadmap in itself, as well as we'll have supplemental articles that kind of talk about enablement and community and platform and things like that. And our last piece is that we covered off on is how BreakFree helps in these things. And what we've done as being an execution-focused firm who wants to come in and really make this shift happen to expand our IT operating model by really doing, right, not just by telling. We've developed a number of execution enablement focused frameworks that give the teams funded and supported by IT to enable effective digital use of cloud, operationalization and usage of DevOps processes and technologies, Agile and product. And we've built frameworks for how do you enable that? Like, what does that look like? What should that team do? What should that engagement be between an enablement group and the teams who need to be enabled? We've got our DevOps playbook framework, which helps teams understand, because there's a plethora of things we can do in DevOps, different techniques and processes, which ones they need to focus on right now, and how enablement can provide the right kind of engineering, augmentation, skills development, etc., to make that stuff happen. Cloud focuses on how do we operationalize cloud effectively, what do we do, what don't we do, what kind of foundational resources are we going to need, what kind of enablement resources are we going to need, how do people consume it correctly, what is the life cycle of it long term, how do we go from minimally viable cloud consumption all the way to mature cloud consumption and do it the right way. And Agile talks about how do we apply Agile to all areas of digital, not just our engineering teams, but what about our platform or enablement? Like, Agile is used everywhere to manage this stuff, and we have to understand broadly how it's applied there, and then also how product and not just things like work management, but how do we make that bridge between IT and the business? What does that look like? How does that function? And so we help companies by bringing these, training our staff on them, staffing our resources on initiatives, and then training your staff on how to do the same thing. And we work collaboratively using these frameworks and our expertise to really level up a company's ability to do this stuff. So we've got a number of links on our frameworks. You can really go to our website. We'll link to our description of our frameworks. Here, what I would say is that if you are interested in what goes into these frameworks, we kind of keep that close to the vest. But if you are really interested, we can just reach out. We'll get an NDA signed and we'll walk you through. We've got a huge suite of documentation and outputs and process diagrams and tools and things like that go into these frameworks that we actually share with our customers, but does require some documentation. So reach out if you need that. There'll be contact information with this video. Hopefully it becomes a good reference for you in the future.